Alright, in this video I wanted to talk a little bit about some ways to use different devices for descending a rope, rappelling, abseiling, whatever you want to call it. And typically, probably the single most common device for that purpose is an 8-ring. And it's said because it looks like a figure 8. And this one's kind of old and beat up, but there's a couple of different types here. You have just a typical 8-ring, and then you have this fancy rescue 8, which I'll get into some of the features of this one in a little bit. But for starters, normally, actually before I go into that, let me just state for the record, don't try any of this at home. You really need to get some qualified instruction from a certified climbing instructor before you do any kind of these techniques like this. It's very important. I can't stress enough. The reason I'm doing these videos is hopefully to spark interest in vertical rope use and climbing, mountaineering, spelunking. I just want to spark an interest in it. But don't do anything you see in these videos. Make sure you get some actual qualified instruction first. And now that I've said that, I'll go into explaining some of the ways to that I rig these devices. So, 8-ring. For rappelling, you would simply pass the rope through and around, and then clip into your harness. And you always want to use a locking carabiner to clip in. This is a screw gate carabiner that I've got locked in. And then basically, this allows you to descend the rope like so. By applying downward pressure on this rope, it actually locks the device off and won't allow you to descend anymore. So you can vary your rate of descent by varying the amount of this lower rope that you allow to slip through your hand. All this is doing is acting as a friction multiplier. That's all it's doing. I'm using accessory cord here simply because it's more supple than the actual static rope I have, which is pretty stiff. But normally you'd be using a pretty fat 11mm rope, either a static or dynamic rope, to descend. You wouldn't want to rappel off of an accessory cord unless it was a dire emergency. One of the problems with rigging the rope this way is that it can slip up and form a knot, locking you off. And if all your body weight is pulling down on the descender, it can be next to impossible to get this righted, while your weight is on the rope. So you'd be stuck halfway down your descent. There's a way to solve that problem. You can clip the carabiner through the rope. Now it's going to act in a similar fashion to the way it did before. Make sure you lock the gate on your carabiner. It's still going to act as a friction multiplier. However, this is prevented from slipping up over and forming that knot now. So that's another way to rig this particular descending device. Over here we have a rescue 8, and it actually has these ears to prevent that from happening. So these ears on either side of the 8 are meant to block this loop from slipping up and forming that knot. Another interesting use for this particular descender is that it's made with a really wide opening so that you can double the friction. So if you're rappelling and you have an injured climber clipped to your harness, you can double the friction through here so that you're able to lower twice as much weight with about the same amount of pressure on this lower line. So that's one of the many uses for this big hole here. Another thing is that if you're rappelling a single line and you have to pass a knot, this big opening can actually help you to just pass a knot through the 8-ring without having to remove it from the rope. And that can be very handy if you, for whatever reason, your descent is so long that you have to join 2 ropes to get down. Another cool thing that this can be used for is as a belay device, and some people use belay devices for rappelling and descending, but you would clip this into your harness like so, and then this is also a friction multiplier. So, you know, this is the climber that you're belaying on this side, out this way, and you're feeding the rope through like so, giving a little slack as he climbs, and it can be used to belay like so. There's actually a few more uses for this rescue aid. I'm not familiar with all of them, but it's a really handy tool. So, and there's a lot of information available on how to use this. Really handy tool to have. And I think this one is actually hard anodized. So, one thing that I have been made aware of as far as anodized descending devices is once you do wear through that anodizing, the underlying aluminum is going to be softer, so you'll have a sharp edge of anodized metal. So once you wear through it with the rope, you're going to want to retire it because it'll start to cut the outer sheath of the rope, and you don't want that to happen. So now, if for whatever reason you're stuck without a descending device, a regular carabiner can be used. Perhaps the simplest way is to just clip 3 or 4 turns through the carabiner, depending upon how much weight you're lowering. And again, you know, you would clip a second carabiner in your harness, lock it off, and now it functions just like any other as a friction multiplier. Now, all of these methods impart some spin on the rope, but if you're doing a long descent where you're hanging in free air, you're not descending a cliff face, this is probably not one of the methods you want to use. Because of this spiral winding through here, it'll impart a lot of spin. So as you descend, you'll be doing pirouettes all the way down. But in an emergency, if it's all you've got available, it's a way to give yourself a friction multiplier so that you can actually get down the rope. Okay, so I hope that you found this video entertaining and informative, and I hope that it's inspired you to seek some professional instruction in climbing and rope use. Thanks for watching. Alright, in this video I wanted to talk a little bit about some ways to use different devices for descending a rope, rappelling, abseiling, whatever you want to call it. And typically, probably the single most common device for that purpose is an 8-ring. And it's said because it looks like a figure 8. And this one's kind of old and beat up, but there's a couple of different types here. You have just a typical 8-ring, and then you have this fancy rescue 8, which you know, I'll get into some of the features of this one in a little bit. But for starters, normally, actually before I go into that,